Hello and welcome to another edition of Adam's Music Box, where today we're mourning the loss of David Loggins, a great singer-songwriter whose corpus of work was mainly from the 70s, but he was someone whose talents and whose influence on the music industry extended well beyond the handful of solo albums he put out, because he wrote songs with people ranging from Three Dog Night to Anne Murray and Willie Nelson and Kenny Rogers and many, many Nashville legends. This was a unique era in time when the singer-songwriter was not only very much in demand, but was very much more versatile than such a class of musician had ever been before or since. We'll get to that in a moment, but I want to recommend to those who maybe haven't listened to much David Loggins, check out his self-titled album from 1979, because this album, which was the last full LP that he recorded under his own name, although he'd be active as a songwriter and as a performer into the 80s, but this album at the very tail end of the 70s, it was, in my view, his most complete album because it had something for everyone. It had some music that we could call yacht rock, that sort of style. So think Christopher Cross, think Michael McDonald's Doobie Brothers, think some of the later Steely Dan stuff. So it had some of that. Some jazz influence, some country influence, which is obviously one of the genres that he's known for, some pop and some rock. You can hear a bit of Seals and Crofts, that type of sort of fusion between country and pop and jazz. So it's really a unique album of very original songs, but in this melding of different styles. And of course, I've got the cover there right behind me. But in terms of the two singles that he's most known for, the first is obviously Please Come to Boston, and that was from round about 1974. Now, this is one of those classic tales of searching and woe and love lost, and it's again symptomatic, if you will, of these deeply sincere singer-songwriter ballads that came out of this era, and that one encapsulated that as good, if not better, than anything. And obviously, his diversity in terms of writing, which is really what David Loggins is probably most known for. He wrote the theme song to a golf tournament. That's right. The Masters theme, which has been used by broadcasters, primarily CBS, whenever that tournament is on. He wrote that. The piece of music is called Augusta, named for the place in Georgia where they hold that tournament. And hopefully he made quite a few royalties off of that because he certainly deserved to do just that. Now, let me get back to this era of singer-songwriters in which David Loggins' legacy sits. The late 60s into the early 80s, so that encapsulates, or the 70s for those not good at counting, as I'm not, that was a unique era. And let's look at the trajectory of composition in the pop world to see how we got there. From the dawning of the modern recorded age, where music became commercialized in the first two decades of the 20th century, right up until the 60s, the typical format of a pop song is that dedicated composers, songwriters would come up with the song. Sometimes it was only one person, oftentimes it was two, one person to write the lyrics, one person to write the melody, and then there would frequently be an arranger who would literally orchestrate the piece for whatever kind of ensemble a particular vocal artist wanted. And this format was seen among the most famous vocalists of all time in that golden mid 20th century era. We're thinking the Bing Crosbys, the Frank Sinatras, the Sammy Davis Juniors, the Andy Williams, people like that, the Perry Comers, etc. Then the 60s happened. And what happened in the 60s is the conquest of the pop music world by rock bands who, on the whole, wrote their own music. And this was something that the Beach Boys did, the Beatles did, the Rolling Stones didn't do it at first, but then they did, the Animals did, the Dave Clark Five did. And by the mid 60s, it was really de rigueur. If you were a rock band, and look at the ones that came out in the mid 60s, Frank Zappa and the Mothers, Pink Floyd, the Moody Moody Blues, later on Jethro Tull and King Crimson, all of these types of Jefferson Airplane. You wrote your stuff. Jimi Hendrix. And obviously, covers were a thing, and that's never gone away, but you wrote your stuff. Now, this didn't mean that the young, dedicated composer went away. It's just that the new generation of songwriter composers were taking their cues from the rock-dominated pop world much more than the great songwriters and arrangers who worked with people whose debut came before the advent of rock and roll. Again, your Sinatras, your Crosbys. And my favorite songwriter that came out of the 60s in that mode was the wonderful Jimmy Webb, who we've done videos on this channel of before. Now, at that same time, you've got a lot of people coming out of the woodwork, rising up through the music industry, and we're talking late 60s, early 70s here. And these were people that in a previous generation would have strictly been songwriters. But because there was such a demand for the singer-songwriter, following on from the phenomenon of the band that only writes its own music that it then performs, we see so many singer-songwriters, solo artists, duos, small groups that really just flourished in the 70s. And it was an era where you could get songs on the radio that were still very introspective. Many of them were melancholic as well. Again, the 70s was this era of, well, it goes beyond dualism because there were so many different kinds of music that catered to so many different kinds of emotion. There was sort of toe-tapping, happy blues-based rock and hard rock. There was highly dramatic and emotionally, yearnful progressive rock. There was get down and boogie disco, R&B, funk, and soul music. And there were very introspective singer-songwriter songs. And of course, David Loggins was very introspective, and his number one hit, Please Come to Boston, again, quintessential, indelible to that era of singer-songwriters. Now, sadly, many of the people in this genre tended to fade away as the 80s went on. People like Seals and Crofts called it quits in the early 80s. David Loggins stopped putting out his own albums after I think his masterpiece, self-titled, in 1979. And you see many cases of this. The Carpenters sort of faded away. And the 80s, obviously, you see the pop world sort of conquering the disco world and the punk world, becoming new wave. The rock world kept on steadily reinventing itself with new forms of hard rock, new subgenres of metal, the sort of reimagining of glam rock, an early 70s genre that meant something different in the 80s. It moved from London to LA in terms of its location. But in all of this, the singer-songwriter became less prominent. Now, the singer-songwriters never went away, because to be a singer-songwriter, you don't need a huge budget in terms of studio time, in terms of instruments. All you need is a guitar in your hand or a piano to sit at, and you're there. And so there will always be singer-songwriters. It's going to be the genre of music that technology will have the hardest time killing, because when it's just a person with their organic voice and strumming along or playing chords on the piano, you're going to have a harder time having AI replicate this very direct human emotion than you will with more elaborate forms of music that the AI can more or less scrape from music catalogs and use MIDI to recreate. So definitely pay your dues to David Loggins. If I'd listen to the entirety of his final album, his masterpiece, and then work your way back, listen to the rest, and listen to the Augusta theme song. If you're not a golfer, it might be the first time you hear it, and I think you're going to like it. Like, subscribe, pardon me, and we will see you next time. Take care.